Working? Yes, okay. It's not necessarily off topic to ask you about Iran, because we discussed earlier the degree to which the UN can or cannot help alleviate what is now the third arm of the axis of evil that has not yet been addressed. And I really disagree with one thing you said, where you suggested we have time. I don't think we have time, and I think there are a lot of media reports supporting that concern. What can we do ASAP to really resolve this problem?
Well, I'm an optimist. When I say I have time, I'm an optimist. I believe truth wins and goodness prevails. So it's kind of the way I wake up every morning and look at that. But on the other hand, I'm also realistically assess the dangers. Iran represents the greatest danger that we face down in the Middle East. I'll give you, though, two optimistic perspectives, three things. And not a foolish, not a blind-eyed optimism. I think very, very practical. And by the way, well, I'll go back to my other comment about folks working both sides of the aisle. I think the biggest threat, by the way, one of the biggest threats we have is that there are a lot of my colleagues who don't think who by the way, think we have lots of time. Lots of time. I think you can challenge that. I also think, unfortunately, through the New York Times and some other media outlets, there is this perception because we had intelligence lapses in Iraq, and somehow, therefore, anything that comes out of the intelligence community representing a threat versus from Iran or anywhere else is somehow suspect. And that would be a terrible mistake. That would be a terrible mistake. But here are the two kind of notes of optimism, a couple of things. I can lay them out. One, the reality is that Iran truly is susceptible to economic pressure that perhaps other nations are not. And I'm probably saying what most folks probably know. 40% of the gasoline is imported. If Iran does invest $100 billion in its oil infrastructure over the next less than 10 years, that will come to an end. The President will tell you, and I think he said it publicly, he certainly said it to me face to face, he believes money trumps religion when it comes to Iran. That their economic vitality is at stake. And in the past, we were doing about 20% of impact with sanctions, and we've really exacerbated that and moved that forward. In addition to that, you have two other things that changed. France is different. Let's face it, Sarkozy it's a whole different world from Chirac. And when the French foreign minister says that we need to be prepared to go to war with Iran, I don't think he's saying that because they really want to go to war next week. I think he's saying it to send a message to others that you have to know that this is the bottom line. And the bottom line, I repeat, and this is where I say some of my colleagues don't believe this, but I do, and I think it's important that we all have to, that the prospect of Iran getting a nuclear weapon is simply unacceptable. Simply unacceptable. And it's unacceptable, by the way, not just in kind of the concern that many of us talk about that, well, Ahmadinejad says that he's going to destroy Israel, right? Take him at his word, right? Says that. But beyond even that, the prospect of handing a nuclear weapon off, there is without a doubt, one may argue whether they do that or not, there is no question that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, the Saudis will get a nuclear weapon. And the Egyptians are not going to be left in a lurch. And then you're going to be standing there, all of us sitting around, where you're going to see proliferation going to a point that nobody can control it. And then even though I'm an optimist, the world becomes a very scary place. And so the prospect of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, I believe, is a non-starter. But I also believe that there are a series of things that have kind of weighed in our favor that have not weighed in our favor before. And that in that sense, I believe we have a little time. And I believe also that we're making use of it. And in the end, you leave no option off the table. No option off the table. The President's been clear about that. But what I worry about, again, is the perspective among some folks that we start saying, well, maybe it really won't be the worst thing. And I believe it will be.
Yes, Claudia.
By the way, this is the smartest person about the United Nations in the room, right here.
You're very kind, and thank you, but actually this room is full of people who understand a lot.
And also, I'll add Ann on that.
And this is the man who did the best single investigation of oil for food, by far. Okay. The tricky bit. On Ban Ki-moon, with financial disclosure, he did release his own financial disclosure form, and this is a matter that involves peril for us all, he promised us a full audit of UN operations, actually system-wide, but especially North Korea. At this point, Ban Ki-moon, the former foreign minister of South Korea, which is subsidizing the North, who would have every reason to have access, he's able to fly to Antarctica to warn us about the weather. He's traveling all over the Middle East, and yet he can't even get auditors into North Korea for the promised audit the audit he promised us in January. What's going on, and should this be overlooked or condoned? Thank you.
I know that it wouldn't be an easy question, but first, I'll state by my original proposition that Ban Ki-moon is a substantial step up from Kofi Annan. Doesn't say much, but that's important though. That's I'm one of those, and I represent the state of Minnesota. We have the Great Lakes there. You get these big ore carriers up there, and when they're in Lake Superior, they don't turn corners. They get moving in the right direction. That's what they do, and ultimately they get there. So I do give Ban Ki-moon credit for a number of things that he's done, which represent the far cry, including, Claudia, by the way, conversations that I've either seen or even talked to the Israeli ambassador about, which really represent a change of perspective in terms of Israel and the United Nations. And I think you got to give credit for that. I do not think that the United Nations has done what needs to be done when it comes to auditing North Korea. As you know, Claudia, some of this is a public record. My subcommittee I've been investigating, looking at the United Nations Development Program in regard to its actions in North Korea. We originally had a hearing scheduled in November. I pushed the hearing back a month because I want to make sure we dotted some I's and crossed some T's and kind of tracking the paper flow. As you recall, we went forward earlier with George Galloway with the investigation on oil for food and had George Galloway up there. And in the end, everything we had on him was corresponded to what Paul Volcker had, was confirmed. But his challenge was, show me the money. And at that point, we hadn't had tracked all the dollars. So eventually, we had to go back and track all the dollars and find out that on the day that an oil for food transaction was done by his close associate, that the money went from there ultimately into his wife's account, and we tracked dollar for dollar. And so with UNDP. One of the challenges that we have there is we have United Nations Development Program that sends money into places like North Korea with no accountability, with no tracking ability, and so we're doing some things that need to follow up. So I think that the present situation is unacceptable. The question is how we handle it, and I think we'll have more to say about that at another point in time. But I would clearly say that it is unacceptable to have such a lack of accountability in the distribution of United Nations funds. There has to be a better system, and I am results-oriented. I'm looking not just at identifying the problem, but I'm also trying to sort out solutions.
I promised the Senator that he would be able to take leave of us at precisely this time, so I want to thank you very much for coming, and we all tremendously wish you the best in the next election, too.
Thank you.